Okay. So first of all, thank you, Isabella, for organizing, and thank you everyone for organizing this wonderful conference. And I enjoyed a lot. My own research is about domestic economic issues in China, especially inequality, distribution, and labor. So I don't study the economic issues such as international political economy and economic relations, international economic relations. So in this 2 days conference, I learned a lot actually, and you know that China is a big market, and China is a big market not only for firms but also for economists. So for Chinese economists, we focus a lot about the Chinese economic issues, and some of us focus more about the United States and the Europe, but not on the developing world. So 2 years ago, in 2015, I attended a meeting about the economic relations between China and Latin America, which was organized by Columbia University in the U.S. and Renmin University, where I worked. We found that for the Chinese economists, we could hardly find any Chinese economists who study Latin America countries' economy. And a few years ago, in 2008, I met with a friend. She is Brazilian. She is a Brazilian economist, but last year she passed away very young. And her name is Paula Nabuco. And maybe some of you may know her. We had a lot of discussions, and she said that in 2008, in Brazilian, she can find very little materials about the Chinese economy, so she decided to go to China and stay there for 2 years to study the economy and also the language. I guess at that time, the study about the Chinese economy in Brazil has just begun or has just started. So, but this time, 7 or 8 years later, when I come to Brazil for the first time, I found that there are many economists, and you are so familiar with the materials in China, and what is new normal and what is supply-side structural reforms. I think you had the materials as I have. So. These are some situations about Chinese economic studies about Brazilian and Latin American economies. So this is the last session of this conference. We are supposed to have a debate, but Professor Hongfang and I found that we have nothing to debate with each other. In general, we agree with each other. So I think because the title of this concluding remarks is China in Interesting Times, I will just skip the debate and talk about something interesting. So I will generally talk about two topics. The first topic is the so-called new normal. What is new normal in China's context? And the second topic is the so-called supply-side structural reforms. So for the new normal, my first topic is for the new normal. So what is new normal? We can observe that there is a slowdown of the Chinese economy, especially after 2010. Some people, including the government, defines a new normal as the low performance of the economy. It seems that there is no reasonable explanation why this new normal happened. And some people may argue that in the past 3 decades, China has experienced a very fast growth, and this kind of very fast growth are not sustainable. And that's why we now have a slower growth. But this explains nothing. So I argue that China, as well as the Chinese government, has found where the problems are located, but they didn't found the root of the problems. So in response to this slowdown of the growth, to explain the slowdown of the growth, there are several explanations. So the first explanation is to blame the world. So it's in this explanation, it is the external crisis, the global crisis, that led to the slowdown of the economy. But I don't think this is a very reasonable explanation, because the external effect, the global crisis, indeed had some negative impact on the Chinese economy, but it should be a short-term thing. But we cannot observe that the economic growth recovered after a few years of slowdown. And the second explanation is to blame labor. So that means people argue that wages grew too fast after 2008. Why it grows too fast? Because of the Lewis turning point or some other reasons. But is the wage level in China really too high? I think professors yesterday has talked about this issue. Whether the wage level is too high in China, I think to answer this question, we need to compare the wage level with the labor productivity of Chinese workers. And also we need to compare the wage level with a living wage. That means a wage level that can sustain the lives of workers. So if we compare the wage level with labor productivity and compare the wage level with a living wage standard, then I don't think the wage level of Chinese workers are too high. Sorry. And the next explanation, the third explanation, is to blame the state, either the central government or local government. In this explanation, the slowdown of the economy is the failure of policies. So these policies include the 4 trillion yuan stimulus package that happened in late 2009 and early 2010. And for local governments, the local governments take too much debt during this stimulus package. So this is the third explanation to the slowdown of the economic growth. So I would argue that these 3 explanations are not reasonable. And I propose that it is because of the contradictions of the mode of accumulation that's led to the slowdown of the economy. So yesterday I have shown some figures about the labor share and the wage level, the labor productivity level in China. And today I would like to show another 3 figures. And the first figure is the rate of surplus value, which is a Marxian measure of distribution. And I estimate the long-term rate of surplus value from 1956 to 2014. And this figure is different from the figure about labor share yesterday. The labor share is the distribution in the overall economy, in the entire economy. But this rate of surplus value is for the enterprise sector, so much smaller than the entire economy. As you can see that the rate of surplus value is decreasing from 1978 to 1998. So in these 20 years, the rate of surplus value is decreasing. And in the second period from 1998 up to I guess, 2008 or 2009, it is increasing. It was increasing. So from this trend, you can see that the rate of surplus value is very high, and I guess everybody knows that the rate of surplus value contributes to the profitability of firms, right? So if you have a rising rate of surplus value, then you should observe a very high profitability for Chinese firms. So next. And the next is China's organic composition of capital, which is also a Marxian measure of technology. And in Marx theory, if you have a very fast growth of organic composition of capital, it will deepen the profitability, right? But you can see that before 2008, we don't have a very fast growth of organic composition of capital. But after 2008, with the massive investment, the organic composition of capital increased very fast. And the next, please. So finally is China's rate of profit, and this measures the profitability of China from 1956 to 2014. And in the recent period, from the late 1990s up to now, you can see that there is a reversed U shape of profitability. And from 1998 to about 2008, the profitability increased dramatically. But after 2008, it began to fall, which we, in the same period, we observe the so-called new normal of the Chinese economy. So what's the contradictions of this mode of production in recent years, in the years after the late 1990s? And people can find that the wages of workers are repressed in this period. And the repressed wage has led to the low consumption share in GDP. And that means in the aggregate demand of the Chinese economy, consumption has played a very small role. That means to sustain the Chinese economic growth, China has to rely more on exports and investment. But after 2008, due to the decline of the world demand, we can no longer rely on exports. So the exports declined dramatically within a few years. So that's why we observed the organic composition of capital increased dramatically after 2008, because China has to rely more on investment. So my argument is that the contradiction of this mode of production relies on the low wage share or low labor share of the economy. Due to the low labor share, we have to rely more on exports and investment. And when exports does not work, we have to rely more on investment. And too much investment has led to a lot of other problems, such as overcapacity, such as the rising leverage ratio, and such as the housing bubble in urban China. So this is my explanation to the new normal. It's not the fault of labor. It's not the fault of the government. It's not the fault of the world or other countries. It's the fault of the contradiction of the mode of production. Right? So now we know that what's the reason, what's the roots for this new normal period of Chinese economy. So the next question I want to deal with is how do we respond to this difficulties in economy? So the Chinese government's response to this difficulties, to this new normal, is another round of reforms. And this round of reforms are called the supply-side structural reforms. When this concept was proposed, actually, for myself, I didn't know what's the meaning of it. And some people may think this is related with the supply-side school in the U.S., which is generally speaking a group of neoliberal economists. But later I found that, okay, for this time again, China and the Chinese government has found where the problems are located, but have not found the roots of the problems. Because this so-called supply-side structural reform many deal with problems such as overcapacity, such as high leverage ratio. So it sees the problems of the economy, right? But how to deal with these problems? So in this reform, what do we do? These reforms include reduce the overcapacity of some sectors, including the steel industry and the housing industry. And meanwhile, also to expand other industries, such as the new energy, the green energy, and also the electric cars. In fact, the government has spent a lot of money to promote these new industries. For example, today, if you want to buy an electric car in Beijing, the local government will subsidize about 30% of the price of the car. So it becomes available to the customers. So it seems to me that the structural reform, the supply-side reforms, is like a relocation of investments from those sectors with overcapacity to those sectors with a promising future, such as green energy. But the real problem of the mode of accumulation has not been touched. So what's the real problem of the mode of production? So in my view, is distribution. It's the low wage share or low labor share. So there are some conceptions proposed by the leadership of China, such as common prosperity. That means we need to pursue more inclusive growth. Everyone should be included in the. Everyone should be benefited from the growth. But in fact, this kind of conception only related to the reduction of poverty, but not related with the growth of wages. So for local governments are still reluctant to fastly increase the minimum wage, even though most of the migrant workers living in a very low standard and cannot meet the living wage standard in urban areas. So what I want to say is that, okay, this kind of structural reform, the supply-side reform, deal with some problems, especially those problems, those immediate problems, such as overcapacity. But meanwhile, it didn't deal with the core of this contradiction, which is the low labor share. So if we want to overcome a so-called middle-income trap or the new normal of the economy, we need to substantially reverse the distribution pattern of this country, of this economy. So before I stop talking, I want to talk about the role of power relations, the role of power of the working class in China in the policy-making process. Maybe some people were here yesterday, and you know that when I talked about the reasons for the fall of labor share, I talked about two reasons. The first is the growth of labor productivity, and the second is the repressed power of the working class. Actually, there are two groups of economists who each of them support one of the reasons. So for people like Dick Law, who was supposed to be here, but he could not come this time. And Dick Law thinks that China is a new pattern of economic growth, especially in the pattern of technical progress. So China has found a new path for development, and especially technological progress. And on the other hand, Ming-Chi Lee from Utah University argued that China has this faster economic growth because of class struggle, because workers obtained a very small part of the growth, and profits was very high. So, but my opinion actually to explain the faster growth of China's economy as well as the fall of labor share, my opinion stands in the middle. So not the same as Dick Law, but also not the same as Ming-Chi Lee's. So if you look at the past, the history, especially the history from the 1990s to now, why China didn't become a neoliberal economy? I mean, in many places, such as the state-owned sector, China could fully privatize its economy. For example, in fact, China has only privatized the small state-owned enterprises, but actually, China could privatize all of the state-owned enterprises. It seems to me, it seems to us, that China has made the right choice, right? Made a smart choice. And many people think that, okay, China has a smart leadership, a wise leadership, right? This kind of leadership always make the right option, always make the right choice, right? Especially in terms of this major changes, such as privatization, such as financialization and deregulation. But I would argue that in the policy-making process, the power of the working class play an important role. This process of policy-making is a kind of contested terrain. That means this is a field of struggles. So if the government could privatize all the enterprises, they have already done that. It is because we have a very powerful working class that block the state or block the emerging capitalist class to do so. So perhaps, maybe for a developing country, a smart leadership is not necessary. What we need to find is a smart working class, right? A smart working class, or the right working class. So, standing at this point of history, China is experiencing the low growth, and we can also observe that there is a mild rise in the power of working class after all these years of repressed wage share. Maybe in the next 10 or 20 years, we'll observe some major changes in China. But this is, I'm not very confident to say that there must be a change. But maybe in the next 10 or 20 years, with the rise of the working class power, we can see that there will be a substantial reversal of the wage share, and the contradiction of the old mode of accumulation can be resolved in this way. So that's what I want to say. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.